The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was bigger than any building humans had ever seen. The ceiling stretched so high that clouds formed near the top, and the walls were made of crystal that glowed with soft blue light. Thousands of alien beings filled the massive space, their strange voices creating a low buzz that echoed through the chamber. Ambassador Hyun-woo stood alone in the center of the hall. His dark suit looked small and plain compared to the colorful robes and armor worn by the alien delegates. Around him sat creatures that looked like giant insects with blue skin and creatures that moved like snakes, but had arms and legs. The most powerful beings in the galaxy were all here, and they were all staring at him. Hyun-woo had been Earth's voice in the galaxy for 10 years. He had worked hard to build friendships with other species. He had signed trade agreements and peace treaties. He had helped solve disputes between alien worlds. He thought he was making progress. He thought humans were becoming accepted members of the galactic community. He was wrong. The blue-skinned Altari delegate named Veltar rose from his seat. His voice was cold and mechanical when he spoke. The universal translator in Hyun-woo's ear turned the alien words into Korean, but the meaning was clear and terrible. The Galactic Council had made their decision. Humanity was too dangerous to remain in civilized space. Veltar read the charges against humanity in a voice that showed no emotion. Humans were too violent, they said. Human soldiers fought too hard in battles. Human traders were too aggressive in business. Human colonists changed planets too quickly. Human scientists asked too many questions. Human children grew up too fast and learned too much. The worst charge was that humans were unpredictable. Other species followed patterns the aliens could understand. But humans would be peaceful for years, then suddenly become warriors. They would seem weak, then show incredible strength. They would appear simple, then reveal hidden intelligence. This made the aliens nervous and fear what they could not predict. Hyun-woo tried to speak in defense of his species. He talked about all the good things humans had done. They had shared their medical knowledge to cure alien diseases. They had helped rebuild worlds damaged by wars. They had rescued alien ships lost in space. They had welcomed alien visitors to Earth with open arms, but the aliens did not want to hear about human kindness. They only remembered human strength. They remembered how human soldiers had fought to protect alien civilians during the Kresh Rebellion. They remembered how human engineers had built impossible structures that other species said could not be made. They remembered how human diplomats had solved problems that had puzzled alien minds for centuries. The vote was not even close. Almost every species in the galaxy voted to exile humanity. Only 3 small alien groups voted against the decision. The rest wanted humans gone from their space forever. The Serpentine Sylvan Admiral named Heshra smiled with her sharp teeth as she announced the final count. Humanity had 30 solar cycles to leave all colonies, all space stations, all presence beyond their home system. Any human found in alien space after that time would be arrested and sent to prison planets. Any human ship that entered alien territory would be destroyed without warning. The message was clear: get out and never come back. The news reached human colonies across the galaxy in hours. Captain Minho was commanding the colony ship New Seoul when the message arrived. His ship carried 300 families who had spent 5 years building a new life on the agricultural world of Haven Prime. The planet was perfect for growing food with rich soil and gentle weather. The colonists had built farms and schools and hospitals. They had made friends with the peaceful alien species that lived on nearby worlds. Minho's wife, So Young, was teaching human children and young aliens in the colony school. When the evacuation order came, she had been showing the children how to plant Earth vegetables alongside alien fruits. The children were excited to learn how different species could work together. Now she had to tell them they would never see their alien friends again. 8-year-old Jinwoo was playing with his best friend, a young Altari boy named Kelman, when his mother came to get him. Jinwoo did not understand why his mother was crying. He did not understand why they had to pack all their things and leave their home. He asked if Kelman could come with them to Earth, but his mother just hugged him and cried harder. The evacuation was a nightmare that lasted for months. Human colonies that had taken decades to build were abandoned in weeks. Families packed only what they could carry, leaving behind homes they had built with their own hands. Children born on colony worlds cried as they left the only homes they had ever known. The Kresh commander Zictol watched the human evacuation with satisfaction. He sent daily reports to the council about how efficiently the human problem was being solved. His insect-like soldiers made sure no human tried to hide or stay behind. They searched every building, every ship, every hiding place to make sure all humans were gone. The agricultural world of Haven Prime was left empty. The farms that had fed thousands of beings were abandoned. The schools where human and alien children had learned together were closed. The hospitals where human doctors had saved alien lives were shut down. The aliens who remained on the planet looked at the empty human settlements and felt a strange sadness. They did not understand space. Stations that had been home to human families for generations were evacuated in days. The massive mining operations in the asteroid belts were shut down. The research stations where human scientists had made discoveries that helped all species were abandoned. The trade routes that human merchants had established were closed. The human fleet that left alien space was the largest migration in galactic history. Hundreds of ships carrying millions of humans formed convoys that stretched across light years. Children pressed their faces against windows to take last looks at the worlds they were leaving behind. Adults wept as they watched their dreams disappear into the darkness of space. The aliens celebrated as the last human transport ship vanished into hyperspace. The galaxy was finally free of the unpredictable and dangerous human species. The Altari threw parties in their crystal cities. The Kresh danced in their hive cities. The Sylvan held ceremonies in their underwater cities. But the aliens had made a terrible mistake. They thought that forcing humans to leave would make them weak and scattered. They thought isolation would make humans give up and fade away. They had no idea that being alone would make humanity stronger than ever. They had no understanding that forcing humans together would unite them in ways prosperity never could. They did not know that humans were at their most dangerous when they had nothing left to lose. They did not realize that 30 solar cycles was enough time for humans to plan. They could not imagine that the species they had dismissed as primitive would use their exile to become something the galaxy had never seen before. As the human ships disappeared into the void carrying their cargo of anger and determination, the aliens went back to their normal lives. They continued their small wars and their political games. They traded with each other and made new alliances. They forgot about the humans they had banished. But in the darkness between the stars, the human fleet was already changing. The children who had been forced to leave their homes were growing up with stories of the worlds they had lost. The adults who had been humiliated were making plans. The exile was over, but the real story was just beginning. The galaxy would be peaceful for 50 years, but that peace would come to an end. And when it did, the aliens would learn that they had made the worst mistake in galactic history. They had turned humanity into their enemy, and they had given humans 50 years to prepare for war. 50 years had passed since the Great Exile, and the galaxy had forgotten about humanity. The aliens went about their daily lives, trading with each other, fighting small wars, and making political deals. The Altari expanded their crystal cities. The Kresh built new hive worlds. The Sylvan explored deeper parts of the ocean worlds. No one talked about humans anymore. No one wondered what had happened to them. No one cared. The Sol system had become a forbidden zone marked on every star map with warning symbols that meant danger, and quarantine alien ships were ordered to stay away from human space. The few alien captains who accidentally wandered too close to Earth found their ships automatically turning around thanks to navigation computers that had been programmed to avoid the human system. But Earth was far from quiet. The blue planet that had once seemed small and crowded was now the center of the greatest military buildup in galactic history. The humans who had been forced to return home had not spent 50 years feeling sorry for themselves. They had spent 50 years getting ready for war. Commander Taemin stood on the observation deck of the largest space station ever built by human hands. The station was called New Hope, and it floated in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Around him stretched a view that would have terrified any alien who could see it. Thousands of ships were being built in massive shipyards that stretched for millions of kilometers. The asteroid belt that had once been full of floating rocks was now almost empty. Every piece of metal and mineral had been mined and turned into something useful. The ships being built were not like the small human vessels that had left alien space 50 years ago. These were massive warships that could destroy entire fleets. The smallest of them was bigger than the largest alien battleship the biggest of them could crack. Planets and half-engineer Yunji walked through the weapons testing facility. On Mars, her team had spent decades designing weapons that could penetrate any alien shield. The humans had studied every piece of alien technology they could find. They had learned the weaknesses of every alien defense system. They had built guns that could fire through solid matter and missiles that could think for themselves. The most impressive human creation was the new faster-than-light drive system. Scientist Wu Jin had led a team of the brightest human minds to solve the problem of interstellar travel. The aliens had always been faster than humans in space, but not anymore. The new human ships could travel at speeds that made them invisible to alien sensors. They could appear anywhere in the galaxy without warning, but the most important change was not in technology, it was in the human spirit. The exile had done something to humanity that the aliens had never expected. Instead of breaking human resolve, it had made humans stronger than ever before. Every person on Earth knew the story of the exile. Every child grew up learning about the homes their parents had lost, about the friends they had left behind, about the humiliation their species had suffered. The hatred was not loud or violent, it was cold and patient. It had been building for 50 years like pressure in a container that was about to explode. The humans had not forgotten a single detail of their exile. They remembered every alien who had voted against them, every insult they had received, every tear their children had shed. Admiral Sung Ho commanded the human fleet from his flagship, the Vengeance, a ship so large it had its own gravity and weather systems. His fleet contained 10,000 warships, each one crewed by humans who had been born in exile, or who remembered the old days when humans had been welcome in the galaxy. Every human soldier had been trained, not just to fight, but to hate. They knew the names of every alien leader who had voted for the exile. They had studied the weaknesses of every alien species. They had learned to fight in every possible environment, from the crystal caves of Altari worlds to the underwater cities of the Sylvan General Dayun trained armies on Earth and Mars and the moons of Jupiter. Her soldiers were not just physically strong, they were mentally prepared for the horror of war. They had grown up with stories of exile and abandonment. They believed that the galaxy owed humanity a debt that could only be paid in blood. The human population had not just survived the exile, it had exploded. Earth now held 20 billion humans compared to the 7 billion who had lived there before the exile. The colony worlds had been rebuilt in the Sol system. Each planet and moon had been turned into a fortress world capable of defending itself and launching attacks across the galaxy. But the humans were not planning a simple war of conquest. They were planning something far more sophisticated. They had spent 50 years studying their enemies, learning their weaknesses, mapping their worlds, identifying their leaders. The humans knew more about alien society than the aliens knew about themselves. The plan was not to destroy alien civilization, but to replace it. The humans would not just conquer alien worlds, they would remake them according to human values. The aliens who had once looked down on humanity as primitive and violent would learn what it meant to be truly civilized. Human spy networks had been planted throughout the galaxy using technology that made human agents invisible to alien detection systems. These spies had spent decades gathering information about alien military capabilities, political structures, and social weaknesses. They knew which alien leaders could be bought, which populations were unhappy with their governments, and which worlds were ready for revolution. The humans had also been preparing for the psychological warfare that would be just as important as the physical fighting. They had studied alien psychology and learned how to break alien morale. They knew that most alien species were used to following orders without question, and that this weakness could be exploited. The children who had been forced to leave their homes 50 years ago were now adults leading the human war machine. Jinwoo, who had once played with alien friends, was now a captain in the human fleet. He commanded a ship called the Lost Home, and he had never forgotten the alien friend he had been forced to leave behind. The teachers who had once educated human and alien children together were now training human soldiers in alien languages and customs. So Young, who had once cried when leaving her school, was now a colonel in human intelligence. She knew more about alien culture than most aliens. Did the time for hiding was almost over? The humans had spent 50 years in isolation, but that isolation was about to end. The galaxy had forgotten about humanity, but humanity had not forgotten about the galaxy. The aliens had thought they were safe, but they were about to learn that they had made the worst mistake in galactic history. The human fleet was ready, the human army was prepared, the human people were united in their desire for justice. The aliens had forced humanity to leave their space, but soon humanity would return, and when they did, the galaxy would never be the same. Again, the countdown had begun. The ships were fueled, the weapons were loaded, the soldiers were ready. The 50 years of exile were about to end, and the age of human dominance was about to begin. The galaxy had been peaceful for half a century, but that peace was about to be shattered forever. The first sign that something was wrong came on a quiet Tuesday morning when the Altari patrol ship Blue Wind simply vanished from existence. Captain Coulter had been flying his routine patrol along the edge of Altari space when his sensors detected an unknown object. His last message to command was confused and frightened. He reported seeing a ship design that was not in any database. Then his transmission cut off forever. The Altari High Command was not worried at first. Ships disappeared in space, sometimes due to engine failures or asteroid strikes or pirate attacks. But when they sent a search team to investigate, they found something that made their blue blood run cold. The Blue Wind was still there, floating in space, but it was completely empty. Every crew member had vanished without a trace. The strange thing was that the ship was undamaged, the engines were still running, the life support systems were working perfectly, the food in the cafeteria was still warm as if the crew had just finished eating, but 73 Altari officers and crew members had disappeared as if they had never existed at all. 3 days later, the Kresh mining station on Veltara went silent. The station had been operating for 30 years, pulling valuable minerals from the planet's crust. It employed over 500 Kresh workers who lived on the station with their families. When the daily production report failed to arrive, the Kresh military sent an investigation team. What they found was impossible to explain. The mining station was running perfectly, all the equipment was working, all the lights were on, all the computers were functioning, but every single Kresh person was gone. The investigators found meals half-eaten on tables, they found beds that was still warm, they found children's toys scattered on the floor as if kids had been playing just moments before. The security recordings showed 6 hours of complete static. During that time, something had entered the station and removed every living being without causing any damage to the facility. The Kresh investigators were experienced soldiers who had seen many strange things in their careers, but this mystery terrified them. The third incident could not be ignored or explained away. The Sylvan diplomatic vessel Serpent's Pride was found drifting in deep space by a merchant ship. The diplomatic vessel was intact, but its crew was unconscious. When the Sylvan crew woke up, they told a story that chilled the hearts of every alien who heard it. A massive ship had appeared from nowhere, they said. It was larger than any vessel in their databases, and its design was completely unknown. The mysterious ship had somehow disabled the Serpent's Pride without firing a single weapon. The Sylvan crew had found themselves unable to move or speak or even think clearly. Then beings in strange armor had boarded their ship. The boarders looked almost familiar, but their technology was decades ahead of anything the galaxy had seen. They had examined every part of the diplomatic vessel, they had copied all the computer files, they had studied the crew like scientists studying insects. Then they had left as quietly as they had come. The most disturbing part of the story was that the boarders had looked like humans, but that was impossible. Humans had been exiled 50 years ago. They were trapped in their home system with primitive technology. They could not possibly have built ships that advanced or developed armor that sophisticated. Admiral Heshra of the Sylvan fleet dismissed the reports as hysteria or hallucinations caused by whatever weapon had knocked out the diplomatic crew, but her dismissal turned to terror when her own flagship was surrounded by 12 unknown vessels that had appeared from empty space. The unknown ships were sleek and black and completely silent. They moved through space like living things, and they had appeared without triggering any alarms or sensors. The Sylvan flagship was the most advanced warship in the galaxy, but it was helpless against these mysterious vessels. A communication channel opened and the voice spoke in perfect Sylvan language. The voice was calm and polite, but it carried an undertone of terrible authority. The speaker identified himself as Captain Dongwu of the human fleet, and his message was simple and terrifying. "We have returned," he said. "The galaxy will remember why you feared us." The human ships vanished as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind only the shocking realization that humanity was back in the galaxy and they were no longer the weak species that had been driven away 50 years ago. Panic spread through alien space like a disease. The Galactic Council convened emergency sessions. The same chamber where they had once banished humanity now echoed with fear and confusion. The old aliens who had voted for the exile were too frightened to think clearly. Reports poured in from across the galaxy. Human ships had been spotted near Kresh military bases. Human agents had been detected infiltrating Alteri research facilities. Human signals had been intercepted coming from deep space in all directions. It was as if humanity had surrounded the entire galaxy without anyone noticing. The most terrifying realization was that the humans were not attacking randomly. They were targeting specific locations and specific people. Every alien who had voted for the exile was being watched. Every official who had enforced the banishment was being followed. Every leader who had celebrated humanity's departure was being hunted. The humans had kept perfect records of every slight, every humiliation, every injustice from 50 years ago. They knew the names of every alien who had wronged them. They knew where those aliens lived. They knew about their families, their businesses, their weaknesses, their fears. Captain Yuna led the human task force that captured the former Kresh War Minister Ziktal, the old insectoid who had once commanded mighty fleets. Now trembled like a scared child when faced with human soldiers. The humans had surrounded his private compound on a remote world and taken him without firing a single shot. The human captain read him the charges in a voice that was colder than space itself: conspiracy to commit genocide, forced displacement of sentient beings, crimes against civilization. The old Kresh minister who had once bragged about solving the human problem now begged for mercy, but the humans were not interested in mercy. They were interested in justice. They informed Ziktal that he would be tried according to human law, the same law that had once protected the alien civilians that humans had never harmed, the same law that aliens had ignored. When they drove humanity into exile, the galaxy was learning a harsh lesson about the consequences of their actions. They had thought that removing humanity would make them safer. They had believed that humans were too primitive to be a real threat. They had assumed that exile would make humans weak and scattered. Instead, they had given humanity 50 years to nurse their grievances, 50 years to plan their revenge, 50 years to build the tools necessary to make that revenge absolute. The humans had not returned as simple conquerors seeking territory or resources. They had returned as judges seeking justice. The aliens who had once looked down on humanity as violent and unpredictable now realized that they had been right to fear human nature, but they had been wrong to think that exile would solve their problem. Instead of making humans disappear, exile had made them stronger, more united, and infinitely more dangerous. The galaxy would never be the same again. The age of alien dominance was over. The age of human justice had begun, and the aliens who had forced humanity to leave were about to face the consequences of their actions. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything in the history of the galaxy. The great crystal chamber that had once echoed with confident alien voices now filled with whispers of fear and panic. The massive holographic displays that usually showed peaceful trade routes and diplomatic agreements now flashed red with warnings about human military movements. Ambassador Veltar stood at the center of the chamber, but he was no longer the powerful leader who had once banished humanity. 50 years had aged him terribly. His blue skin was now pale and wrinkled. His once strong voice was weak and shaky. The other council members looked to him for leadership, but he had no answers to give them. The reports coming in from across the galaxy painted a picture of military precision that terrified even the most experienced alien commanders. Human strike teams were hitting targets with surgical accuracy that seemed impossible. The Kresh fortress world of Ziktar had been the most heavily defended planet in the galaxy, protected by orbital weapons platforms and millions of soldiers. The human attack on Ziktar had lasted exactly 57 minutes. The planet's defenses had been neutralized without causing any civilian casualties. The Kresh military commanders had been captured alive and were now being held in human prison ships. Every weapon on the planet had been destroyed, but every hospital and school had been left untouched. The Sylvan battle fleet had been the pride of their civilization, 700 warships, commanded by the most skilled officers in their navy. The fleet had been patrolling near their home system when they suddenly found themselves surrounded by human dreadnoughts that had appeared from nowhere. Admiral Heshra had ordered her ships to attack, but the human vessels had shields that could not be penetrated. The Sylvan weapons simply bounced off the human ships like raindrops hitting a mountain the human commander had given the Sylvan fleet exactly 1 minute to surrender. When Admiral Heshra had refused to give up, the humans had demonstrated their power by destroying a small asteroid with a single shot. The weapon had completely vaporized the asteroid, leaving nothing but glowing dust. The message was clear: the humans could destroy the entire Sylvan fleet, but they were choosing not to. The surrender had been immediate and total. 700 Sylvan warships had lowered their shields and powered down their weapons. Without firing a single shot, the most powerful fleet in the galaxy had been defeated by the threat of human firepower. The Altari research facility on Baltar had been the most advanced scientific installation in known space. It was protected by energy shields that could stop any known weapon and defended by the best soldiers in the Altari military. The facility contained the secrets of advanced alien technology that had taken centuries to develop. The human assault team had bypassed the shields completely, using technology that the Altari scientists could not understand. The human soldiers had appeared inside the facility as if they had walked through solid walls. The Altari defenders had been paralyzed by some kind of weapon that left them conscious but unable to move. The humans had captured every scientist in the facility alive. They had copied every piece of research data. They had studied every piece of equipment. Then they had simply vanished, taking their prisoners with them. The entire operation had taken less than 2 hours, but the most terrifying aspect of the human return was not their technology or their military power. It was their systematic approach to justice. The humans were not attacking randomly or destroying things for the sake of destruction. They had a list, and they were working through it methodically. Every alien who had voted for the exile was being hunted down. Every official who had enforced the banishment was being captured. Every leader who had celebrated humanity's departure was being brought before human military tribunals. The humans had kept perfect records of every name, every vote, every speech, every action. Former council member Rickstall of the Kresh had been living in comfortable retirement on a peaceful garden world. When the humans found him, he had been the one who had proposed the exile 50 years ago. He had given passionate speeches about the danger that humanity posed to galactic civilization. When the human soldiers arrived at his home, they were polite and professional. They showed him the warrant for his arrest. They read him his rights under human law. They allowed him to pack a small bag before taking him away. His family was not harmed. His property was not damaged, but he was gone. The charges against him were read in a courtroom. Aboard a human ship, the prosecutor was a young human woman named Judge Minyoung, who had been born during the exile. She had grown up hearing stories about the world's humanity, had lost about the lives that had been destroyed, about the humiliation her people had suffered. Rickstall tried to defend his actions by saying that he had been protecting the galaxy from human violence, but Judge Minyoung had evidence that contradicted everything he claimed. She showed recordings of human peacekeepers saving alien lives. She presented data about human medical advances that had cured alien diseases. She displayed testimonies from aliens who had been helped by human kindness. The old Kresh politician who had once commanded the respect of the galaxy now sat in silence as his lies were exposed one by one. The humans had done their research. They knew about every good deed that had been ignored, every act of kindness that had been forgotten, every sacrifice that had been dismissed. The trial lasted 3 days, and the verdict was unanimous. Rickstall was found guilty of crimes against sentient beings and sentenced to community service on a human medical ship. He would spend the rest of his life caring for the refugees and victims of the wars that had raged while humanity was in exile. Similar trials were taking place across the galaxy as humans systematically captured and prosecuted everyone who had been involved. In the exile, the justice was swift, but it was also fair. The humans followed their own laws carefully. They provided lawyers for the accused. They allowed appeals. They treated their prisoners with dignity, but the aliens were learning that human justice was also absolute. There was no escape from the consequences of their actions. The humans had the technology to find anyone anywhere in the galaxy. They had the records to prove any crime. They had the determination to see justice done. The galaxy was changing in ways that went beyond military conquest. The old power structures were collapsing as alien leaders were arrested or fled into hiding. The trade routes that had connected alien worlds for centuries were being reorganized under human oversight. The political alliances that had maintained galactic order were being dissolved. Young aliens who had grown up after the exile watched in amazement as their elders were brought low by the returning humans. Many of these young aliens had never heard the full story of what had happened 50 years ago. They had been told that humans were primitive and violent, but the evidence they were seeing suggested something very different. The humans were not acting like conquerors. They were acting like judges. They were not destroying alien civilization. They were reforming it. They were not seeking revenge. They were seeking justice. And that justice was more terrifying than any military defeat because it was absolutely deserved. Galaxy was learning that actions have consequences, that the strong cannot simply cast out the weak without facing judgment, that justice delayed is not justice denied, and that humanity had returned not to destroy their enemies, but to teach them what it truly meant to be civilized. The war, if it could be called a war, had lasted exactly 6 months and 13 days. The human fleets had moved through the galaxy like a tide that could not be stopped. They had captured every major world, taken control of every important space station, and defeated every alien military force that had tried to resist them. The final battle had taken place in orbit around the Altari homeworld, where the combined fleets of 3 alien species had made their last stand. Against them came the human armada, led by Supreme Commander Jae-sung aboard his flagship, the Justice. The battle had lasted 4 hours and ended with the complete surrender of the alien forces, but calling it a battle was misleading. The alien weapons could not penetrate human shields. The alien ships could not outrun human vessels. The alien computers could not hack human systems. It was less like a fight and more like a demonstration of how far human technology had advanced during the 50 years of exile. Supreme Commander Jae-sung had stood in the former Galactic Council chamber and announced the end of the old order. The crystal walls that had once echoed with alien voices now carried the sound of human authority. The holographic displays that had once shown alien worlds now displayed the new reality of human dominance. The Galactic Council was dissolved forever. The system of alien rule that had governed the galaxy for thousands of years was ended. The new government would be called the Human Hegemony, and it would be based on principles that the aliens had never truly understood: justice, equality, protection of the innocent, and the rule of law. The transformation was swift and comprehensive, but it was not the brutal conquest that many aliens had expected. The humans were not interested in enslaving alien populations or destroying alien cultures. They wanted something much more sophisticated. They wanted to rebuild galactic civilization according to human values. Engineer Su Min led the teams that replaced corrupt alien governments with efficient human administrators. The old system had been based on favoritism and bribery and political connections. The new system was based on merit and fairness and the protection of individual rights. The changes were dramatic and immediate on worlds where alien nobles had lived in luxury while their people suffered. Human administrators established systems of social welfare and education on planets where different alien species had been kept separate. Human officials promoted integration and cooperation. Dr. Kyung-ho established medical centers that treated all species equally. The old system had provided the best medical care to wealthy aliens while poor aliens received little or no treatment. The new system guaranteed medical care to every sentient being regardless of their species or social status. The most shocking change was in education. Teacher hygiene created schools where alien children learned human values alongside their own cultural traditions. The curriculum included lessons about justice and equality and the importance of protecting the weak. The children learned about the exile and its consequences as a warning about the dangers of prejudice, but the most revolutionary aspect of the new order was how the humans treated their former oppressors. Instead of executing the aliens who had voted for the exile, the humans offered them a chance at redemption. The choice was simple: they could face prison or they could serve their community's former council member. Veltar found himself working in a human hospital on a refugee world. He spent his days caring for the victims of the wars that had torn the galaxy apart while humanity was in exile. The work was hard and humbling, but it was also meaningful in a way that his political career had never been. The Kresh warriors who had once enforced the exile were given the opportunity to become peacekeepers. They were trained in human methods of law enforcement that emphasized protecting civilians rather than intimidating them. Many of them discovered that they preferred helping people to hurting them. The Sylvan admirals who had celebrated humanity's departure were assigned to escort refugee ships to safety. They learned to use their military skills to protect the innocent rather than to project power. The work was less glamorous than commanding battle fleets, but it was more satisfying. The aliens who chose redemption over punishment found that the humans were demanding but fair teachers. The humans expected high standards, but they also provided the training and support necessary to meet those standards. They judged aliens by their actions, not by their species or their past mistakes. Within a year, the galaxy was more peaceful than it had been in centuries. The small wars that had raged for decades were ended. The trade disputes that had caused suffering for millions were resolved. The refugee crises that had been ignored by alien governments were addressed. The human approach to governance was working, but it was working in ways that the aliens found difficult to understand. The humans were not ruling through fear or force, they were ruling through competence and justice. They were not demanding worship or tribute, they were demanding only that everyone follow the same laws. The old alien elites who had once controlled the galaxy found themselves powerless in the new order. Their wealth and connections meant nothing under the human system. Their noble titles and ancient bloodlines carried no weight in human courts. Their political influence had evaporated overnight. But the common aliens who had always been at the bottom of the old system discovered that they had opportunities under human rule that they had never dreamed of. A young Altari mechanic could now become an engineer, a Kresh farmer could become a scientist, a Sylvan artist could become a teacher. The humans were not interested in keeping aliens in their traditional roles. They wanted every person in the galaxy to reach their full potential. They established universities and training programs and scholarship funds. They created opportunities for advancement based on merit rather than birth. The changes were not just political and social, they were also economic. The old system had been based on exploitation and inequality, with a few wealthy aliens controlling most of the galaxy's resources. The new system was based on fair distribution and equal opportunity. Human economists restructured the galactic economy to eliminate the extreme poverty that had existed under alien rule. They established minimum wage laws and worker protection standards and systems of social insurance. They created programs to help unemployed aliens find new jobs and training. The results were dramatic. Worlds that had been impoverished under alien rule began to prosper. Species that had been oppressed for centuries began to thrive. The galaxy's total economic output increased dramatically as human efficiency replaced alien corruption. But perhaps the most important change was in the way different species related to each other. The old system had been based on division and competition, with each species looking out only for itself. The new system was based on cooperation and mutual support. Human administrators organized joint projects that brought different species together to work on common goals. Altari engineers worked with Kresh biologists to terraform dead worlds. Sylvan artists collaborated with human musicians to create new forms of art. The barriers that had separated species for millennia began to break down. The aliens discovered that they had more in common with each other than they had ever realized. Under the old system, they had been taught to fear and distrust other species. Under the new system, they learned to appreciate different perspectives and abilities. The galaxy was becoming something new, a truly unified civilization based on shared values. Rather than shared fear, the humans had not just conquered the galaxy, they had transformed it into something better than it had ever been before. But the aliens could not forget that they were living under the rule of a species that had every right to destroy them and had chosen mercy instead. This knowledge made human authority absolute in ways that fear alone never could. The humans had proven that they were not just stronger than their enemies, they were better than them. 20 years had passed since the human return, and the galaxy had become a place that the old aliens would not have recognized. The bitter divisions between species had largely disappeared. The hatred and fear that had once driven galactic politics had been replaced by cooperation and mutual respect. Director Sang-woo walked through the Memorial Hall of the Exile, a massive structure built on the moon that orbited Earth. The hall was constructed from crystal donated by the Altari, metal provided by the Kresh, and artwork created by the Sylvan. It was a symbol of how the galaxy had changed, and a reminder of why that change had been necessary. The walls of the memorial displayed the names of every human who had died during the forced relocation. Every child who had been born in exile, every family that had been torn apart by alien prejudice. The list was long and painful, but it served an important purpose. It reminded everyone of the cost of intolerance and the price of injustice. Alien visitors came to the memorial every day to understand what their predecessors had done. They read the stories of human families forced to abandon their homes. They studied the records of the votes that had driven humanity into exile. They learned about the 50 years of isolation that had followed. Young aliens who had grown up under human rule often wept when they saw the memorial. They could not understand how their elders had been so cruel to an entire species. They asked their parents and grandparents how such a thing could have happened, but the old aliens often had no good answers to give. The memorial also told the story of what had happened after the exile. It showed how isolation had made humanity stronger. It explained how the humans had used their 50 years of banishment to build the technology and develop the unity that had made their return possible. But the memorial was not just about the past. It was also about the future. It contained exhibits that showed how the galaxy had changed under human leadership. It displayed statistics about the reduction in poverty and disease and war. It celebrated the achievements of the new, unified civilization. The galaxy's newest generation barely remembered the old ways of division and hatred. They had grown up in a universe where humans and aliens worked together as equals, where justice was the same for everyone, where the strong protected the weak regardless of what species they belonged to. In the agricultural world that had once been called Haven Prime, but was now known as New Harmony, human children played alongside young Altari and Kresh and Sylvan. The planet had been rebuilt better than before, with farms that used the best techniques from every species and cities that celebrated the diversity of galactic culture. Asian Wu, who had been forced to leave this world as a child, was now the planetary administrator. He had returned to the place where he had once played with alien friends and had made it a model for the new galactic civilization. The schools where he had once learned now taught children from dozens of different species. The old pain of separation had been healed by the joy of reunion. Jinwoo had found his childhood friend Kelman, who was now a respected scientist. The two of them worked together to make their world a place where no child would ever have to experience the trauma of forced exile. But the most important legacy of the human return was not visible in any memorial or museum. It lived in the hearts and minds of every person in the galaxy. The children who had grown up under human rule had learned lessons that would shape the future of civilization. They had learned that diversity was a strength, not a weakness. They had learned that cooperation was more powerful than competition. They had learned that justice was not just a word, but a way of life. They had learned that the strong had a responsibility to protect the weak. Ambassador Veltar made his final appearance before the new Galactic Assembly on the 70th anniversary of the exile. He was now over a century old. His blue skin was translucent with age, and his voice was barely more than a whisper, but his words carried the weight of history. He stood before representatives of dozens of species, including the humans who had once stood trial in the same chamber where he had once held power. His speech was broadcast across the galaxy so that every being could hear the words of the last survivor of the regime that had banished humanity. With a voice that shook with emotion, he formally apologized for the exile. He acknowledged the crimes of the old council. He admitted that the fear and prejudice that had driven their decision had been wrong. He thanked humanity for their mercy and their leadership, but his most important words were directed at the young beings who were listening. He warned them about the dangers of hatred and intolerance. He urged them to remember the lessons of the exile. He challenged them to build a future where such injustice could never happen again. The old ambassador's speech was met with respectful silence from the assembly. The humans who had every right to be angry showed only compassion for the old alien who had helped to wrong them. The other species representatives understood that they were witnessing the end of an era. As Veltar finished his speech and slowly walked from the chamber, the assembly rose to their feet in recognition of his courage in admitting the truth. The gesture was not just for him, but for all the beings who had learned from the mistakes of the past. The real measure of the human legacy was not in the monuments or the museums or the speeches. It was in the children who played together in parks that had been built on former battlefields. It was in the students who learned each other's languages and customs and cultures. Human kids and alien youngsters attended the same schools. They competed in the same sports. They studied the same subjects. They dreamed the same dreams. They grew up believing that cooperation was natural and that conflict was a choice. They understood that the universe was big enough for everyone. The galaxy had finally learned the lesson that humanity had tried to teach them 50 years too late. The species they had feared and exiled had been the key to their own salvation. The humans had returned not as conquerors but as teachers. They had shown the galaxy what it meant to be truly civilized. The exile had been intended to protect the galaxy from human influence. Instead, it had deprived the galaxy of the very thing it needed most: human wisdom, human compassion, human determination to do what was right rather than what was easy. The children who now played together in the parks of New Harmony would grow up to be the leaders of tomorrow. They would face challenges that their parents could not imagine. They would make decisions that would shape the future of galaxy, but they would make those decisions with the knowledge that diversity was strength, that cooperation was power, and that justice was the foundation of civilization. The galaxy was at peace not because humanity had conquered it, but because humanity had taught it how to live. The humans had returned from exile, not to destroy their enemies, but to show them a better way. And in doing so, they had created a legacy that would endure for generations to come. The stars still shone in the darkness of space, but now they shone on a galaxy united in purpose and hope. The exile was over. The return was complete. The future had begun.